And so choosing our guest presenter for this month of July, we're so delighted that we were able to find a way to contact Kay Lindahl, and that Kay Lindahl responded very quickly and said yes, that she could join us over Zoom because she's in California also, so she's not in our neighborhood. And Kay visited our community, as far as we remember, 2 times. One time she came as she was a trustee for the United Religions Initiative, and I believe at the same time she was the chair of the North American Interfaith Network. At least she's done both those tasks, and I believe we met her first under those conditions. And then she came later with the other co-authors of this book that I read the Divine Feminine offering from, Women's Spirituality, can't read the title with Women's Spirituality and Transformative Leadership, Where Grace Meets Power. It's just beautiful resource. And it will be perfect for us to be using this book as a resource as we further explore circular leadership this month. Kay is also a certified listening professional, and she has been a practitioner of centering prayer for many, many decades. And she's also on the board of director of the Rumi Educational Center and Women of Spirit and Faith. And when I was at the Parliament in, I think we figured out it was 2018, Kay was very busy, and I tracked her down though and said hello to her. And I think she kind of remembered me, but she was very busy that day because that was when you were an ambassador still for the Parliament, I believe. And I was so delighted to see her in person again. And I want to read a quote, and you may have read another quote of hers that was might be on the homepage of the website and in the invite and on the Facebook announcement. But here's an additional quote that I'd like to offer you before we give space and listen to Kay. She has written, "Invite the great mystery into your life. Create more space for love and freedom to emerge. Hold space for the patterns that connect. Spirit and soul dimensions are sources which make everything flow in new ways. Slowing down, we find our rhythm, our own natural rhythm. Spiritual listening is embodied listening, in which we become a listening presence to all life." Thank you so much, Kay, for joining with us.
Myself, there we go. Thank you so much for that introduction and for the beautiful opening for your service this morning. It's just very nurturing and loving, and I appreciate being part of it today. And as you said, this is not my first experience with you all. I'm so glad I got to be actually in your actual physical space twice. And I think it was in the late 90s or early 2000s for the first time with the URI. And then, I know it was 2012 because it was the first time that we had actually seen the book, the finished copy of the book. The publisher sent the copies of the book directly to you all. And so we opened that box and saw the book for the first time when we had that signing at your sanctuary then. So it was an indelible memory for me. So thank you for inviting me back. I'm really happy to be here. And when I was thinking about what to say, what to share with you this morning, I kept getting this image in my mind of a tapestry. of my life tapestry and all the various colored threads and represent my life. And some of them have been there for decades and others are new. And it just occurred to me over and over again, came the message to use the notion of a tapestry and to share with you today 3 of the threads that are part of my tapestry. And the first one is obviously, I think from the introduction, has to do with interfaith. The second one has to do with listening, and the third one has to do with leadership. So I'm going to weave those together this morning. And as I do that, what I want to do, I'm very used to having an interaction with the people that I'm speaking with. So because it's a little bit more difficult on Zoom to have everyone being able to interact with me, what I'd like to do is when I come to the end of a conversation about one of the threads, I'm going to invite you to go on chat, and either during the time, or if you have any questions or anything comes up for you while I'm speaking, to just jot it down in the chat, and then I'll check in on the chat 3 times during the course of my talk with you. So if there's anything that's not clear, or if I need to clear up anything, we can do that. So I hope that works for you all. So because it would really help me to sort of feel that I'm interacting with you rather than just talking to a screen. Which is wonderful. I love at least the opportunity to do that, because when she asked me to come up to Seattle, I thought, I didn't have to think about, oh my gosh, I've got to get an airplane, I've got to get up there and all this. I just said, yes, I can just get up and go in my living room and get on my computer. That's perfect. And love to be there. So my interfaith thread really started getting large in 1991 when I was one of the co-founders for a local interfaith group called the Alliance for Spiritual Community. And our purpose was to be to nurture the spiritual nature of community in the town in which I lived. And we were quite diverse. This was in South Orange County, and people think of South Orange County in California as a very homogeneous space, and it's not, because we had 9 different faith traditions at our first meeting, and we met monthly for years after that. But one of the things that we quickly developed was a set of guidelines for dialogue that would help foster our conversations, because we were so diverse. We had so many different traditions represented. And they were based on the work of a scientist actually called David Bohm. And one of the things that he introduced us to was a distinction between dialogue and discussion. And a dialogue comes from the Greek dia, logos, dia meaning through, and logos meaning word or meaning of words. So a dialogue is actually a conversation that is more of a flow of words and meaning, and it's more of an exploration. It's done in a spirit of inquiry, which is what we wanted to have with our interfaith group. Discussion, it comes from the Latin discatere, dis meaning apart, and catere meaning to shake. And a discussion is a conversation in which you're doing some analysis, you're looking for answers, it's done in a spirit of wanting to know, come up with some results. And when we don't have this distinction of dialogue and discussion, I might think we're in a dialogue and really just exploring ideas, and you might think we're in a discussion where we really need to come up with some answers. So we're in 2 different kinds of conversations. So the guidelines we developed reminded us and helped us to stay in the dialogue process. And there are a number of dialogue guidelines out there now, but this was back in the early 90s. There weren't so many, but ours are pretty simple. We just had 4 or 5 of them that were ones that were our guiding principles. And I'll just briefly mention them now, just so you'll have that know where we were coming from. The first one was to speak and listen with respect. The second one was to listen for understanding, rather than to agree with or believe someone else. The third one was speak from your personal experience, not speaking for other people. The fourth one was to honor confidentiality, so what people would feel safe speaking whatever they had to say. And then the fifth one was to listen for patterns, for questions, for ideas, rather than for answers. So it's like exploring something new. And we would just read these dialogue guidelines at the beginning of every meeting so that it would help all of us remember it. So that was in 1991 when that began. Then in 1993, I had heard something about this gathering that was going to take place in Chicago. And turned out it was called the Parliament of the World's Religions. And I just knew I needed to be there. So I got myself there. And that was just one of the most major transformative experiences in my life. Every day I felt like I was changing on a cellular level. There were so many different aspects of different religions that I had never heard of before. And I was just being expanded in my outlook. And it was at that parliament that Hans Kung said, "There'll be no peace among nations until there's peace among religions. There'll be no peace among religions until there's dialogue among religions." And that sort of emblazoned itself on my forehead. It called me forth for the next, still does call me forth in terms of my interfaith work. When I got back home from that, I was invited to participate in co-founding an organization called the Religious Diversity Fair, which was a regional gathering to introduce people to the different religious traditions. We often called it Interfaith 101, because we would really, at that point, this is 1993, and in where we were, there were very few interfaith groups at all when we started out. And this was just a way to introduce all the different traditions that were present in our own community, beyond the traditional Abrahamic traditions. And so we did that annually for a number of years. Then we'd go, the thread keeps going. And in 1996, a woman that I'd met at the Parliament in 1993 invited me to attend a meeting of the North American Interfaith Network in Dallas, Texas, and to give a presentation about the Alliance, which I did. And so when I was there, Bishop Bill Swing was there talking about this brand new thing that he was just starting to vision, which was called the United Religions Initiative. And again, I found myself really wanting to participate in that. And I managed to get in touch with them. And I was involved in the planning of the writing, the purpose, the preamble, and the principles of the United Religions for the next 4 years. And it just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the signing of the charter for the United Religions Initiative, which was held in Pittsburgh in 2020. So now there are over 1,000 cooperation circles, which is the local gathering, in over 100 countries around the world. They're doing amazing work. So I've been attending all the subsequent parliaments as well. So it just once you go to one, it's like you want to go again and again. And in 2009, I was at Melbourne in the parliament there, and I was standing at a large hallway at the top of the escalator. And when this woman I just met called over to me, and she said, "Kay," she said, "we need to talk when we get back home. We have work to do together to see what's emerging for women of spirit and faith after this parliament." And so we did. And so another organization was born. And so that interfaith thread just continues to weave its way through my life and is what brought me here today. So that's the first thread. Are there any comments or questions about that before I go on to the second thread? I don't see anything in the chat box. Okay, that was pretty much just a question.
So Kay, I was going to just share with you that we've had a URI cooperation circle since the beginning of URI. And also a mentor for our community was Brother Wayne Teasdale, which you may have known as well.
I did, yeah. He was I met him at the 1999 Parliament in South Africa. Yeah, he's a great man.
Thank you.
Yes, and so the next thread is the thread on listening. It's a little bit longer thread, and it goes on a little bit, gets thicker through the time. Although I think listening really started for me when I was born, but it didn't really come up to be to the forefront as much as it did also actually in 1991, which I didn't realize at the time when I started my centering prayer practice. But that is a listening practice. It hadn't occurred to me until around 1997 when my spiritual mentor invited me to do some work with him on a retreat that he was giving. And I agreed to do that. And as we were planning it, I thought, well, I can talk about he wanted me to do work on listening. So I said, okay, well, I can talk about centering prayer, which is listening to God. I can talk about dialogue guidelines, which is listening to other people. And the third aspect was, I thought, there's something missing here. And that aspect was listening to self, getting to know your own inner voice. And so over the course of a few weeks, we worked and developed the program for this, and I developed some exercises in all 3 of those, and really didn't know how anything was going to happen, how it was going to turn out. But when I went there and presented these exercises, it was amazing. The response was beyond anything I had imagined, that people really got some great insights and aha moments from participating in these exercises. And we were invited, my mentor and I were invited to do it one more time for a seminary, for seminary students. And then in his wise and kind way, he invited me to think about what it was I wanted to do with this work that I had started doing with him. And I gave it some thought and some reflection. And then I realized after about a week, I said, I think this is the work that I'm being called to do now. I think this is like a gift that's been given to me, and it's mine to, and I'm supposed to share this work out in the world. So I sat down and wrote a brochure, which is still valid today, and had started doing this work, and found that it just started to flow. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned, is just to trust in that flow, trust in that wisdom that's guiding me. So this morning, I'd just like to share a few brief highlights of what I've learned over the past 22 years about listening. And the first thing I'd like to share with you is a definition that I've come up with about listening, and what the art of listening really is. And I think that it's kind of a long one, but I'm going to say it all to you, and then we'll talk a little bit about what some of the highlights of it. So the art of listening, it's the art of becoming a listening presence. It's a way of being in which stillness and attentiveness provide a space in which someone can speak authentically and know that they are being heard. And it is from this place that we can listen across diverse backgrounds and cultures and traditions. It's about being a presence for understanding rather than for judging. When we are open and curious and attentive about another, we discover that a deeper, a more sacred connection with them. We're in relationship. And when we have these experiences in the art of listening, we become aware that it's really a key to communication in our global community. So I think that that's a long definition, but I'm going to break it down a little bit into context and content. And in context, listening has become a lost art in our culture. Most of the emphasis is on speaking. What can I say? What did he say? What did she say? And yet it's the quality of our listening that can make a profound difference in any conversation. There's a Quaker by the name of Douglas Steere who says, to listen another soul into a condition of discovery and disclosure may be almost the greatest service that one human being ever performs for another. I'm going to say it again because there's a lot in this one statement. To listen another soul into a condition of disclosure and discovery may be almost the greatest service that any human being performs for another. So the impact of our listening can really make a huge difference in any conversation. So what I've discovered over the past few years is that the work that I do is really about helping people to prepare to listen. We often think about preparing to speak, but when was the last time you thought about, well, I need to prepare myself to listen in this conversation or in this gathering I go to? It's not something we think about. And yet, if we want to be good at anything, what do? We prepare and we practice. So there are some practices that we can do every day on a daily basis that will facilitate our becoming more present when we listen to another person or in another situation. But before we get to those 3 practices, I want to create a different context, like a different framework in which you might want to think about listening. Because we can think about it this way, and if we just move the frame, expand it a little bit or turn it a little bit, we might think about it a little bit differently, and that could make a difference on how we value listening. And the first one is that listening is an art. The art of listening. It's more than hearing words. It's more than an act. It's what I think we are looking for when we say we want people to listen to us. It's those moments when we're deeply listening to one another. We sense that we're present to each other in a whole different way beyond our individual selves. And some people call that spiritual. Some people call it holy. I chose the word sacred. For me, it's like the sacred art of listening. And there's a philosopher by the name of Martin Buber, and what he says is, when two people relate to each other authentically and humanly, God is the electricity that surges between them. So that experiencing the art of listening, I also talk about it as it's a moment of at oneness. We are at one with the other when we're listening in this deep, profound, heart-to-heart way. So it's a shift from listening as something we do to listening as something we be. We become that listening. It's not about doing listening, it's about being listening. That makes sense. The second one, so that's listening as an art. The second one is listening as a choice. And we really do choose whether or not we listen to someone else, oftentimes unconsciously. For example, sometimes if you've ever found yourself in a situation where you've been listening to someone and all of a sudden you realize you haven't heard a word they've said for the last who knows how long, that's kind of an unconscious choice. Sometimes it might be easier to think about conscious choices, like we're not listening because we're not interested in the topic. We have no interest in that at all. Sometimes there's a part of us that knows we should listen to someone else and what they're saying, but we know that if we do, we might have to change how we think about something or the way we do something, and we're not quite ready yet to do that. So instead we don't listen. And then another possibility is that there's something going on in our own lives that is so profound that we really don't have any room to take in anybody else's listening, to listen to someone else, to give them our full attention. So learning that listening is a choice can be a very profound insight, because there's a power in knowing that it's okay to say, I can't listen right now. Can we talk in 20 minutes? Or can I meet with you tomorrow? And there's okay to say, yes, I can give you my full attention, and then actually stop and give someone your full attention. There's a syndrome that we talk about in my work, and it's called CPA, continuous partial attention. It seems like we're continuously paying partial attention to everything, but we're not paying full attention to anything. And so this notion of listening being a choice and giving our full attention to someone is a new way to think about listening. And it's when we do this, we find that we really do listen better when we know we've made the choice to listen, and that there's much less stress we have when we've chosen not to listen, and we've told people that we can't listen right now, but we can listen at some point in the future. So listening is an art, it's a choice, and it's a gift. It's probably one of the greatest gifts, again, that you can give another person. Remember when someone is really listening to you like that, it's so healing and nurturing, and it's so as though time stands still. It's like it shines a new value on listening, and it almost gives us permission to slow down and have these kinds of conversation. So those are the three frameworks to look at listening. And now I'm going to talk briefly again about the three practices, so you get a sense of what those three practices might be. There's a Cuban proverb that says, listening looks easy, but it's not simple. Every head is a world. There's a lot going on in our own minds, each one of us, all the time. And so how do we practice listening is something that will help us to really be able to focus on the speaker. And when we learn how to focus on the speaker in that way, we can be fully present and aware with what they're saying and who they're being. And we can listen to people even if we hold different points of view from other people, when we learn how to be fully present with them in this way. So the first practice is to cultivate silence, because there really is no listening without silence. And there are any number of practices related to silence and to help us become more accustomed to that silence. But in our culture, it's pretty hard to find silent time. So one of the things I suggest people do right away is to notice how much noise there is in your life. See if there's some way that you can cut down on some of the noisy aspects of your life and just have the outer silence, the environmental silence. Find yourselves ways to keep your environment more quiet. And then the second one is to just start, if you don't have a silent practice already, to start with only just a minute a day when you are intentionally in a silent space. just to be that way, just to hold yourself still and become aware of the silence for 1 minute a day. And most people who start that practice often start adding minutes or adding numbers of minutes or adding single minutes more often in their day, because what they find out is that it really tends to do almost like a reset in your brain when you slow it down, even for a minute. And there have been studies done that show that it can happen within a minute, that it does something that your brain can start functioning at more effectively again when you come back into the world from that moment of silence. So the noticing that awareness to become a better listener is in silence is a way to refresh our minds and just take a break, and so we can really be present with someone else. The second practice is reflection, is a practice of reflection, and it's learning to slow down and reflect. And reflection is learning how to listen to yourself, learning how to listen to your own inner voice, that voice that's deep within you, that has the wisdom that is you. And when we deepen our relationship to ourselves, we deepen our relationships to that inner voice. So how do we recognize this inner voice? How do we get to know this inner voice? One of the ways is to ask questions. And the first question to ask yourself when you're faced with something is, what wants to be said next? Or what wants to be done next? Rather than what do I want to say next, or what do I want to do next? Just by that little tiny shift in the question causes you to slow down a moment and reflect and say, well, what does want to be said next? And that you reflect a little bit and look inside and tap into that inner voice that's there for you. And then you can share that instead of just sharing what the first thing that comes into your mind. And if you listen for your true wisdom to reveal itself, it involves slowing down and learning and being patient and being present. The third practice is to become present. And it's to be in the moment, to be fully present with another, fully engaged with another when you're in that conversation. And one of the practices that we have for this one, it's called a mindful minute. And again, you just take something that you do on a regular basis as something routine, and for 60 seconds, be fully aware of what is happening every second and keep in the present moment. So you use something like, if you were going to say that you're fixing breakfast, you'd say, I'm walking into the kitchen, I'm opening the refrigerator door, whatever it is that you're doing, just for one minute, to be fully present to everything you're doing for that minute. And people who take this practice on sometimes say that that's the only minute that they remember out of the whole day, because they're so used to multitasking, or what we call multitasking, because science has told us now that our brains actually don't do two things simultaneously, they do them sequentially. And it's no wonder we're so tired, because our brains are working so hard when we think we're doing many things at the same time. So one of the practices here is to just slow down and unitask for a while. Just do one task at a time. And when people ask you what you're doing, you say, I'm just unitasking. I'm practicing unitasking. So we have this wonderful opportunity to practice on a daily basis silence, reflection, and presence. And those three things can really make a difference and impact the quality of your listening anytime along in the future. I know I'm going really fast here because we don't have a whole lot of time together, but I just wanted to get some of those things. So I'm going to stop with the listening and check on the chat here, and then we'll go on to the next thread. Let's see if I can read these. It's very small print here. Let's see. The 4 principles of the guidelines for dialogue. Is that what you meant? The 5 guidelines for dialogue? Okay, I'll do those again. Let's see if I can get them in the order that I gave them to you. Here we go. Speak and listen with respect. Listen for understanding rather than to believe or agree. Speak from your personal experience. Honor confidentiality. Listen for patterns, questions, ideas rather than answers. So that, I think you got the four of them there. That was that last one I think was missing. Okay, let's see what else is here. that. Let's see, co-counseling. There's just a comment about co-counseling and listening and being listened to. Okay. I am now going to go on to the last thread, and the last thread is about leadership, and particularly a little bit about circular leadership, which is what I understand you said was your theme for July. And again, this leadership thread entered my tapestry in a broader way back in the 60s, which I hadn't reflected on that for a long time. And I became part of an organization called the Leche League, which was to help women who needed help in supporting them in their breastfeeding. And we met in circles. And oftentimes in the middle of the circle were the babies, while they were crawling around the inner part of the circle while we were meeting in the outer part. But we always had them in a circle, and it just seemed like a natural way to gather. And almost everything I've been involved in ever since then has involved being in a small group anyway, particularly has been in circles. And so instinctively, I knew that the format for the work on listening needed to be done in a circle right from the very beginning. And I would request when I went places to speak that the room be set up in a circle. And I'd walk in the room and there was chairs in a row, or sometimes chairs and desks in a row. So I became very good at moving furniture. And I started moving furniture. Even when they said, please don't move the furniture, I always moved it back and made sure the room was the same way that I came into it. But I always started the circle with talking about the value and the importance of sitting in circle. And it makes sense. Sitting it's rooted in ancient tradition. Our ancestors sat in circles around a fire, usually for warmth and protection and companionship. And that's where they had their community meetings and their celebrations. So circles provided support. They generated mutual understanding. They strengthened relationships and created spaces for healing and transformation. So circles are very powerful. They're also egalitarian. There is no front and back of a circle. There's just a circle. All voices are heard equally in a circle. There's no head table in a circle. So the circle conveys a sense of connectedness. We see each other when we're sitting in a circle. And then the center becomes the focal point. It becomes what I call a sacred space. And one of something that influenced me early on was a poem by Black Elk that I often use when I'm speaking as well. And Black Elk has this to say about circle. He says, everything the power of the world does is done in a circle. The sky is round, and I've heard that the earth is round like a ball, and so are all the stars. The wind in its greatest power whirls. Birds build their nests in circles, for theirs is the same religion as ours. The sun comes forth and goes down in a circle, so does the moon, and both are round. Even the seasons form a great circle in their changing, always coming back again to where they were. The life of a person is a circle from childhood to childhood, and so it is in everything where power moves. So the impact circle is pretty profound. For the past 11 years, circular leadership has been one of the core principles of Women in Spirit and Faith. One of the first things we did was to ask ourselves about definitions of terms. What is a leader? What is a leadership? And we came across one that Meg Wheatley uses, which we really liked, and it said, a leader is anyone who is willing to help. We are all leaders, everyone. We're all encouraged to lead in our circle, each doing what we do best. And leadership, I remember once talking to someone, and this one said, well, I'm not a leader. And I said, well, what kinds of things do you do? And she said, well, I just go and I help, I lick envelopes and put things in boxes. And I said, well, that's a leader. Without you, that's a leadership. You're leading in that way. That's your skill at leadership. And it's the way we really shifted our perspective on what leadership was and what a leader was. So we often talk about shared leadership. So a leadership is not the one at the front of the room all the time. A leader can be at the side, at the middle, at the front, at the back. It doesn't matter. And we never lead alone. There's always someone with us. And it's a way of, I may be speaking, but I know that there's someone there who's holding the space for me to speak in, that is holding that container for the group, for all of us to be together in. So we use words, a lot of words like we convene meetings, we weave things together, we collaborate with each other. Those are the words that we use when we talk about leadership, and circular leadership in particular. And we spend time in creating what we call the container for our gatherings. We meet ahead of time and we imagine how we might create a space in which something can emerge that is maybe new and something that we hadn't thought about before. And it's that same question: what wants to happen next? What wants to emerge now, rather than what do we want to do or what do I want to do? It's switching it so that it becomes a community thing by asking those questions. So the part of the creating the container is, what is the overall purpose for this gathering? It's not a specific agenda. It's just like, what do we hope to accomplish? Why are we meeting? What is it that's calling us together? Getting clear on that. That's part of creating the container. And then every time we gather, we begin with silence. We acknowledge the sacred center, usually with a candle, or we invite others sometimes to bring things to put in the center that they want to add to that, so that there's a presence there when we all gather. We always have a time of check-in, so that every voice is heard before we get to anything that any other kind of subject that we want to bring up or talk about. We often use what we call a talking piece. It's often a stone, or it can be a feather, or it can be almost anything, that the person who's holding that is the one who speaks, and it gets passed around the circle, and people use, or sometimes it's put in the center of the circle, and whoever wants to speak just picks it up and speaks. But we know that helps us to stay focused on the speaker. So we listen to the speaker. We listen for guidance. What is being asked of us now? Again, what wants to be said next? We follow what I call the flow of grace. We just follow whatever the flow is. Sometimes the flow stops. We'll pause. We'll start again. Say, wait a minute. We need a pause here. We need to have some quiet time here. And anybody can ask for that. And it's a way of honoring. Either sometimes it's to honor what's been said. Sometimes it's because we feel like we're kind of stuck. And when we take that silence and that time to reflect and then open up the speaking again, that's when miracles happen. We close our meetings with gratitude by finding some word that will express what we are taking away from the gathering. So there's the open and closing. So that's how we do circular leadership in our group that we have for the past, as I said, for 11 years. And now there's a question here. How do you see circular leadership in bringing unity into the atheist, agnostic, and believer experience? It's not about the individual, it's about the group. I think that when you sit in circle, when you sit in community, and you look at what is wanting to emerge out of that community, it becomes less about I'm whatever I am, and more about what is wanting to emerge from this community now, today. I don't know if that helps, but that's how I would look at that question. Is there anything else that anybody wants to ask about that? Because I know I'm getting close to, I'm out of time pretty much. Although the warmth of being with people is missing from Zoom, it is a format in which some ways makes everyone equal and everyone seen. Yeah, I find I'm going to miss, with my own spiritual tradition, we've been meeting by Zoom, and when we go back to meeting in the church again, I'm going to miss being on Zoom because I get to see people, and it just feels, I see their faces, and I miss that because my church is not set up to be as a circular, and I just so I really. I like that aspect of Zoom has been really quite wonderful. And I was away from church for the first 2 weeks that we were on Zoom. And when I came back and I saw everybody that I'd missed so much, and I saw them in their faces. It made me cry. It was just so wonderful. So, yeah. From Jude, it seems like the polarity of our politics right now is far away from listening principles. Amen. That's all I can say. And the thing that gives me a lot of hope right now is that there's so much emphasis on listening. Is that we're talking about listening a lot more than we did certainly when I first started this work 22 years ago. But there's really, I think there's an interest, and I'm seeing more and more articles come out about how to go about listening better and more effectively too, and how to set up groups so that they don't get into the polarity issues. There was a wonderful one I just read yesterday about someone who did conflict resolution in country nation internationally, and he was saying that first, I just have to share this with you because I thought it was so good. See if I can remember it all. The first thing you do is you have in your mind a vision of what you want to come out of this conversation, not the details, but just how do you want to feel at the end of this conversation. And the second was to enter into the conversation with gratitude, that you're grateful that you're having this conversation. The third one had to do with letting the person know that you had heard them. So if someone was saying something that you totally disagreed with, you would still say back to them, tell them that you heard, so for you, this and this and this and this, and just really. And so what you're looking for is for that person to say, yeah, that's right. That's how I feel about it. Because he said, once you get someone to say that that's right, oxytocin gets delivered to the body, and that the sharing of that oxytocin just sort of takes the edge off the fight or flight, what do you call that? Instinct. Anyway, his name was Christopher Voss, V-O-S-S, and you might check it out. I can't even remember where I saw it now, but I was very taken with what he had to say, and he does major conflict resolution in the world. Let's see, do we have time for looking at one or two more? Or should I just close up?
It would be wonderful. We have a sharing time that's coming up where people reflect. The congregation reflect on what they've heard and what they've experienced. So we will still have time for a bit of that. So let's wait for that for a moment. And so Michael was going to share one thing at this point.
I just want to close with a quote before, one short quote. And it's one of my favorite quotes. And it says, being listened to is so close to being loved that most people cannot tell the difference. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that you were talking about meeting in a circle. We normally meet in a circle, so this is normal for us.
Nice.
And we're not a very traditional congregation, but our building is very traditional. It's, as you've been in it, it's a 19th century Lutheran church, and for years we had these big oak pews in here, and I spent years moving those pews in and out of various clumsy circular shapes, and it was such a relief when we finally transitioned into chairs that could be easily moved in and out of a circle. And it really had a huge impact, not just on the space, but on our practice.
Yep.
So let's take just a moment or two of silence, and then we can share a little bit of appreciative reflection about our topic today.
So now the floor is open for anybody who would like to share whatever is in their hearts. And if you have a question for Kay, or you have something that would further dialogue, that's great as well. So really anything that is alive now in your heart.
I have, excuse me. I had a question, Kay. When you were talking about the 5 principles, you said the last one was listening instead of trying to solve problems or make decisions, listening for patterns. And what were the other things we're listening for besides patterns?
Questions and what was the third one? I can't remember now.
There's ideas.
Ideas, right,
Oh,
right,
okay.
right. Thank you.
And then my follow-up to that is, if you're in a group where, let's say, a decision does need to be made or something like that, do you preface your discussion by first having a dialogue and then switching to it and making a conscious? I remember learning about that in my work life, that we had to make a distinction between the two, but sometimes one can precede the other. Is that right?
Yeah, and this is what businesses have learned about that, is that if they need to make a decision about something, they'll spend time in dialogue first, and then go over to the decision-making time. And then the decisions get made much more effectively, and there's more buy-in, and it's just much easier if they've had this conversation where they're not looking for the answer to begin with. They're just exploring and looking at all the possibilities.
Right. Rather than saying, there's never a time, you have to choose one or the other. You just have to know where you are and do that fully. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Kay, thank you very much. I'm reflecting on how timely this message is, because First Sundays are the Sundays where our guiding council comes together after the church service to discuss, to dialogue, to make decisions. And so we have so much richness now in front of us as to how we can continue to meet in that way and guide this beautiful community. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, there's mention of, and it's obvious that there's so much polarity in our culture, has been actually for some time now. Do you have any suggestions about how to invite people to come together who would not necessarily agree with each other or be in the same perspective?
Yeah, there's an organization that actually is going, it's called Listen First, and they have come out of this. They started, I think, in the summer of 2015, before the 2016 election period, because there was already starting to get very polarized then. And it was started by a young man who was a Republican, and he had another friend who was a Democrat, and they were friends, and they wanted to find ways that they could talk to each other, and they developed a whole their guidelines for setting up conversations about that. So that's one resource for you. Another resource is something that it used to be called Public Conversations, but now it's called Essential Partners. And they have a dialogue, and they've come up with many, many different ways and ideas on how to create these conversations. And in fact, there was a documentary about this too. It hasn't made it. It was on a local PBS station, but it hasn't made it to national PBS yet. But it was created by this organization, the Listen First organization.
Do you actually go into a group of people who you think might not agree with you and invite them? I mean, I'm understanding their guidelines, but how do you initiate this?
Well, initiating it, you have to be clear on what the purpose of the gathering is, and make people and have people know what the purpose of the gathering is. It's not, the purpose is not to change their minds about something,
right.
To open up the conversation, to open up the possibility. And some people are willing to do that, and other people aren't.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you can't change somebody else's mind about something, and you can't, if they choose not to, they're just going to choose not to. But there are people who are willing to have that kind of dialogue. It's just framing the conversation. That's what I went to the resources, because they're so good about how you frame the invitation. so that it's not something that is that would put up a barrier that people would say no immediately because
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for asking wonderful questions and sharing from the heart.